Well, welcome everyone to this episode of Beyond the Crucible. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host for this podcast and the communications director for Crucible Leadership. And we have a very special episode today. It's going to be very informative and we hope very insightful and very empowering for you. The subject that we're going to tackle today is leading a life of significance and what that looks like. And our guide in charting that course for a life of significance is the host of Beyond the Crucible and the founder of Crucible Leadership, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, I think we're going to open some eyes today with our discussion.
Thanks, Gary. Significance is a very interesting discussion. So yes, looking forward to it.
So for people who have engaged with Crucible Leadership in the past, they have seen in your blogs, in emails, in the communications that come from you, almost all of them end with a line that says something like, to live a life of significance. The tagline for this very podcast is live and lead with significance. That is a critical part of this philosophy, this life practice that you've developed. So tell our listeners, why is significance the true north of Crucible Leadership?
You know, it's interesting. A lot of people, they just go through life on autopilot. They go to college, get a job, work their way up the corporate ladder, try to have a sustainable level for their families. All of that is good. But from my perspective, there's more to life than just working your way up the ladder. What is life about? What is the purpose of life? And to me, significance is really what we should be aiming for. And I wrestle with significance versus success, which I know we'll get to. But
right.
Significance is feeling like your life will count, feeling like you have a legacy. Again, as I know we often discuss, what's on your tombstone? Is it going to be I made millions of dollars, or I was CEO of this, or branch manager of that, or whatever it is? No, it'll be it'll be something that you think that your family, your kids will be proud of. It's something to me that, in some sense, although it sounds a bit altruistic, will make the world a better place, will help others. Significance is something that you can be proud of in a faith-based context. There's this notion that when we meet our Maker, we'll want him to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Other faith traditions may look at it a bit differently, but there's this sense that you want to feel like your life counted, it mattered, your family's proud of you, and if there is some supreme being in some form, that is proud of you. So that's to me what significance is.
It's interesting that you would say that it was a concept that maybe not everybody embraces. Somebody who does embrace this concept and talks about it, to hear you say what you just said, Tim Tebow, the former college football star who is now actually a minor league baseball player for the New York Mets, he said this, which is an interesting quote, and it sounds like you both are singing from the same page of the songbook. When we talk about living a life of significance and meaning, Tim Tebow said, it's not about fame or money or resources. It's about people and lives and hearts. That's my biggest passion in life. That's a pretty good recipe for a life of significance, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, what he just said, people, lives, heart, it's changing people's lives. It's feeling like those that love you when we're gone, that they'll be proud of us. They'll say, that they made a difference. I think of the founder of the media company I grew up in, Fairfax Media, and John Fairfax. And when I look at his legacy, did he lead a life of significance? Well, you could say, well, he was certainly successful, came out in the late 1830s from England with pretty much nothing. He founded what was to become a huge media organization with, 150 years later, had newspapers, magazines, newsprint mills, TV stations, a huge company. But yet, when I think of why I admire him so much, and as I read works that have been written about him, I think of the life that he lived, which he was a wonderful husband, a wonderful dad, great employer. I mean, when he died, just what the employees said about him and even other papers was just amazing, that he was a good employer, faithful, cared about him, an elder at his church. So he truly led a life of significance. So I admire him, not so much because he founded this great media empire, but who he was and how he led his life and how he lived so well in each area. To me, I can't think of a better model of a life of significance.
That is very insightful about what you value in people is what drives your life of significance. It's how you serve others. And the interesting part of this, and I think it's one of the most not misunderstood parts of Crucible Leadership, but maybe understood, and that is that tension that some see between success and significance. From your perspective, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. You can have both, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not at all against success or money. I mean, some people in some, I guess, traditions believe that, we should suffer and live in poverty irrespective of wealth. And, sometimes it gets even, hurt, worse than that in terms of their attitude to money and possessions. I don't think that it's not really something. My faith tradition talks more about a love of money. In other words, if your whole sense of self-worth is based in money, maybe that's not in balance. But yeah, I mean, I've been blessed. I grew up in a very wealthy upbringing. While not quite at that same level, we're still extremely comfortable. Just by way of illustration, last Christmas, my daughter at the time was living and working in Australia, and we'd be back there fairly often between funerals and weddings. And we said, well, how about we meet in the middle? So we went to Hawaii, and it was an amazing Christmas. Well, so I'm not against, if you're able to, enjoying things in life. I'm not against that at all. But it's more, success is fine, but success in of itself, it doesn't satisfy. It's like, how much is enough? Is $1 million, $1 billion, $2 billion?
Right.
There's always another level. I think we mentioned in an earlier podcast, there's always, in sports, somebody better, quicker, fast. I mean, if you have your self-worth bound up in success, and that really is what it's about, it's being successful is fine. You just don't want your job or your career or your money to own you.
Right.
Because, you want to possess it, not it possess you.
Right.
And that's really the benchmark of, do you have significance and success? If your success is just a byproduct of what you do and you're living a life of significance, they can live in harmony, but it is a tension.
And it's interesting because Crucible Leadership, this discussion of significance, comes in the context of that Crucible experience. Because when you talk about it to people, you're talking about, you've had a Crucible experience, it's been devastating, it changed the trajectory of your life. And for a lot of people who go through one of those experiences, it's failure, it's a lack of success. So it's easy to come out of those things and say, success is my goal. You're saying, no, set your course for something grander than that.
Exactly. I mean, there's a bigger vision than just success. It's, vision and significance are closely related. What vision do you have to make the world a better place? It could come out of your Crucible experience, a traumatic setback or failure in which you don't want anybody else to go through what you've gone through. Maybe you think it would be amazing if, if something was invented, like Walt Disney had a vision of having animated cartoons tell a more thoughtful and deeper story than just, 2 or 3 minute cartoon, hence, Snow White, which at the opening night in Los Angeles, people were actually crying, famous Hollywood stars, Clark Gable and others. So he had a vision. So it's really vision and significance are ties. You want to feel like what you're doing is something that you believe will make the world a better place. Now, in Walt Disney's case, he was very successful, but I would argue he had a life of significance between the movies he made, between his vision of Disneyland and Disney World at a time when theme parks were often unsafe places for families, with, gambling and alcohol. Not that that's bad per se, but they weren't family friendly. And so he had this whole vision. So I would say that he's a very good example of a life of significance and success. I don't think for him it was all about money. That wasn't what motivated him. It was a bigger vision than that.
Yeah. You've written extensively, you've spoken extensively about living a life of significance. And one of the things that you talk about, and this will be helpful to folks who are listening right now, because they've, maybe they've just come out of a crucible and they've examined kind of how they're wired and what lessons about their skills and areas that they have to, get better. That they've examined those things. They have some ideas about how they're wired and how to take the next step. But how can they? What's critical if you're going to chart a course to a life of significance? What informs that?
Yeah, it really it comes down to your fundamental beliefs and values. Now, some people might be people of faith. I mean, we go to an evangelical church. Some people will be of different faiths, maybe different philosophies, and everybody has, I would say, the God-given right to choose their own path. But I would say it's very difficult to be human, if not impossible, without having some underlying values and beliefs. Yeah, to me, it's inhuman not to have something at your core. And so to me, a life of significance must be in harmony with what you believe, what your beliefs are. And only you can determine that. Nobody else can tell you what that is. So you have to really be able to answer the question, to what degree is the direction of my life in harmony with my fundamental beliefs and values? If it's not, then to me, that's an issue. I mean, why would you want to be in a sense of dissonance, a sense of disharmony with what you believe? It's very difficult to be fulfilled if you're going against those. And the issue for most people, they don't consciously go against their underlying beliefs and values, but we're so busy in our day and age, we don't even think about it. And so it's less deliberate avoidance than the tyranny of the urgent. So I'd say the first step is to leading a life of significance is understand what your fundamental beliefs and values are.
And that is a critical point for listeners to understand, because you said it just now. A life of significance is individual. Your life of significance is rooted in who you are. It's not what society deems necessary to do. It's what your vision and what your values and beliefs inform you to want to accomplish, right?
Absolutely. And so that's really the key first step is it's a couple things in leading a life of significance. You've got to understand your fundamental beliefs and values. And as we often talk about in Crucible Leadership, you want to understand how you're wired, how you're designed. We're all wired a different way. And again, we've talked extensively on this. But basically, to lead a life of significance, you want to feel like you're using the skills and abilities that I would say you've been divinely given for a purpose that you feel off the charts passionate about, that's in line with your fundamental beliefs and values, and you feel is accomplishing something significant. Those things will all line up by definition. If it's something tied to your values and beliefs, well, then you will feel it's important, and it's hard for that not to be significant if the vision is coming directly out of those values and beliefs, and in some fashion helps other people. It will line up if you follow that path. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to see how you could avoid leading a life of significance. If it's tied to your fundamental beliefs and values, it's also tied to how you're wired. And another critical component is you need to have what I call fellow travelers, people who are equally passionate about the vision, and at least in some sense, at least in a broad sense, share your beliefs and values. Maybe not precisely, but at least in some global sense. All those things add up to me to being able to lead a path, a life of significance.
And it's true that significance can be big and and it can be local, it can be small. You mentioned Walt Disney. Walt Disney had big significance. He had, right? I mean, he had that, he created an entirely new way to be entertained and to have values presented in entertainment. But it can be as simple as something in your own neighborhood, right? It does not have to be on a grand scale to be significant.
And that's absolutely right. In a Crucible Leadership, when we talk about leadership, we mean at all levels. It could be being a CEO of a large Fortune 500 company, heading up a large nonprofit, or it could be a community, a neighborhood activity. Maybe you live in the inner city and you want to reclaim your park so that local kids can play in safety. And you got to set up a whole neighborhood watch and get maybe some local businesses to contribute to the cleanup, get the local council members on board. And to me, that's equally as big a vision. It's not the size of the vision in terms of numbers, it's how much it matters to you. I mean, to me, a good vision is, if one life is changed, that's a big vision. So it's not about the size, as maybe some people would say. It's more how important is it to you? That's really, to me, the size of the vision, and how do you articulate how that will help others?
Right now, Warwick, there are people who just heard what you said, who have been through a crucible. They're listening in, looking for insights on how to move on. What's your one tip, if you could give one tip to the listener, knowing that their experiences are going to be different, that their visions could be different, some big, some smaller? What's the one sort of universal tip that you could give people to today be the day that they take a step toward crafting a vision for significance and then walking a path towards significance?
I would say, how do you live a life that's in keeping with what you fundamentally believe? It's not easy to put it in a sentence, but if I had to put it in a sentence, it'd be something close to that.
To have them ask that question of themselves: how do I, here's what I believe, here's what I value. Now, how can I use those things to help other people? Exactly.
And I think an extra layer could be when you've had a crucible experience, especially if it's one that's been negative. Maybe you suffered failure, maybe it was a setback. For those that have suffered serious physical injuries, for instance, that's a good example where what you went through was horrific. It may be life-altering, but maybe you can help other people that have been through similar injuries. Maybe you can give them hope. Maybe you can give them, maybe there are things you can do that, at least to the degree that you can, give them some additional mobility. So crucible experiences can provide the seeds of a life-transforming vision that's grounded in what you believe. So that there are also clues about what vision that will be a life significance, what that could be that comes or could come out of your crucible experience.
And Crucible Leadership grew out of your crucible experience. Crucible Leadership is your effort to lead a life of significance after your crucible of losing the family media dynasty, right?
That's exactly right. As again, I've mentioned more on other podcasts, but basically growing up in a large family media business, 150 years old, newspapers, magazines, TV stations, had the equivalent of New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, enormous company. went under my watch, after a $2.25 billion takeover. Yeah,
That
it
was
was
that was
horrific.
billion with a B. That was
It
billion
was.
with a B, listeners.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so. A big number. A lot of red ink. But and so for me, what my passion growing out of it was to help people realize that you may have failed, and maybe you feel like life's over. I can't guarantee that you'll be able to change what others think of you. Certainly, if you Google me, it's not particularly favorable. Young, hot, young, impatient kid, could have had it all, lost it, and that may never change. But yet it gave me this compassion, empathy, this desire to help others who, when they go through failures or setbacks, life's not over. It can be the beginning of a new course. And it has been over the years for me. It hasn't been easy. There's years when my self-worth was pretty rock bottom, and had to claw my way back with a combination of just believing that God loves us, loves me unconditionally, supporting my wife and kids, finding some jobs I could do and not screw up. But yeah, I mean, out of that Crucible experience came, and out of my beliefs that frankly God loves us all, there came a vision of wanting to help people bounce back from failure and setback. It was all directly related to both my beliefs and the Crucible experience I went through.
And just today, on the day that we're having this conversation, you got an email from someone who heard a previous podcast, and you got evidence right there that you are indeed what you're talking about. You're being transparent, you're being vulnerable, you're being humble, and talking about that is making a difference in people. Let's end on this note for listeners who are, thinking of taking those tentative first steps into doing what you've done. Embrace the lessons of the Crucible and start walking towards significance. Let's give them something to hold on to as they go through the process that's going to be probably difficult. It's certainly difficult. Let's face it. Life is difficult, and there are going to be some barriers that you're going to walk into as you walk out your path toward a life of significance. But tell the listeners, when you get an email like that, when someone says, "Thank you so much, your story inspired me, your story told me that I'm not alone," what does that feel like? Cast a vision for folks who are listening about how rewarding that is to be told that your experience is helping them.
I mean, it makes a huge difference. I think back to a couple of months or so ago, I did a podcast, Harvard Business School alumni, where I went to school, and shortly after that podcast aired, I got a email from somebody whose business was, I think it was in the financial area, probably somewhat significant, was about to go under, and he wasn't sure he was going to face his family and people around him, and it's a sense of shame. And, he said to me through that email, "Your podcast, it really made a difference. It helped me, and thank you." And yeah, I think there was the sense from him and others that it made them feel less alone. So when you can use your pain, in my case, to help others, there's this sense of healing. People talk about, maybe there's some purpose to the pain. It's sort of by channeling what's often negative and crushing in a way that helps others, it does provide some healing. It's sort of like, maybe this is a bit tortured analogy, maybe some water drops to somebody, when you feel maybe like you're dying in the desert or something. I mean, maybe it feels like a bucket of water, actually, more than a few drops. But it makes a significant difference. It really does.
And on that note, on that inspiration, we're going to, as I like to say, land the plane. Thank you for your insights as always, Warwick. Thank you, listener, for spending time with us today. If you have any questions about what we've covered here, about Crucible experiences and how they can lead to a life of significance, you can learn more about Crucible Leadership by visiting our website at crucibleleadership.com. On that website, you'll find an email address that you can send. If you have any questions for Warwick, if you have any questions for us about what your next steps are, more insights that you want to glean, feel free to contact us. We truly want this to be an interactive experience as you're listening. As questions pop up, share those with us. You can also engage with us on social media. On Facebook, we're at Crucible Leadership. On LinkedIn, you'll find all Crucible Leadership information at Warwick Fairfax. Warwick's name is spelled with a silent W in the middle, W-A-R-W-I-C-K. You can find it on LinkedIn at Warwick Fairfax. So until next time, when we gather to talk about Crucible experiences and how to overcome them, and really focusing on the reality, as Warwick said a couple times in our time together today, that it's not the end of your story. Your Crucible can be the beginning of a new chapter of your story that leads to what we've been talking about today. And that is a life of true significance that helps others.